Giant 5 Jeff from Two Hacks Garage. Well, what I got here is the aluminum heads that I purchased, one of them, with the stock head from 1968. I just wanted to do a quick little head comparison video to kind of show you what I'm working with and show you how the port differences are on these. This is a 68 casting, 72cc chamber head. This is a new casting with a 95cc chamber head. That's a big difference in cc's, but that's due to the pistons that I'm using with these to get a static compression ratio of about 11.1. So let's do a little bit of a comparison on these heads. One of the big ones, first off, is weight. The weight on this one here is much greater than this. I'm going to actually weigh these out and just throw it in the video at the bottom so you can see. But let's take a look at the actual intake ports on these. So here is a little bit of a close-up of the intake ports on these heads. Let me get some light in here. As you can see in here on this head, here within there, these are dirty. You can see how that runner is right in there. Well, if you look at the actual aluminum head, the actual runner is opened up quite a bit much more. You can see how the flow pattern is just a little bit different within those areas here. Let me see if I can set this down here and get a little bit better of a video for you. All right, here we go. All right, so right off the bat, you can see how on this cylinder head, the aluminum one, this is actually a lot more opened up when it goes to the actual intake valve right through here compared to the cast iron head. You can see this big hump here. This one doesn't really have that. The actual hump for that's further back, and we've kind of cleaned up some of that work in there. The actual port itself on this one is pretty comparable when this was in a stock form. However, you can see right along here with this part, we did open this one up quite a bit. So our actual intake flow side is quite a bit more. The tops of these up into here are actually very comparable to the aluminum one. Not much different as far as that goes. Let me see if I can get a little bit better of a picture or video in there. So you can see in here, it is pretty wide open, and on the cast iron head, it's kind of the same. Not much difference on the top of that intake side, but as you can see, when it comes to the bottom portion of this, on the bottom of the intake run, there is a huge difference when it comes from the stock cast iron one to the aluminum one. Now, let's take a look at the exhaust side. See how easy this one turns compared to this cast iron one here. This cast iron one is extremely heavy, so just keep that in mind when picking heads. All right, so let's take a look inside the actual exhaust ports. So the first thing you can see right off the bat is the bottom of the exhaust port on the aluminum heads has been raised right through here compared to more of this rounded one on the 68 casting head. You can also see a lot of obstruction in here on the exhaust port with all of that. That is not within the aluminum head right through here. That has been in the casting process removed. So what's that kind of telling us? Well, on these heads here, on the aluminum ones, the capability for flow is much more. Even with the raised exhaust floor on here, that's going to actually help this flow a little bit more. Barrows did point out in a really good video, if Ford would have just raised that, the flow capabilities were much better. Well, as you can see in these, this has been raised. There's a radius here, and there is not one here. And up in here, all of this obstruction, that's been removed and recast differently on the aluminum head. Now, one of the big things is on these Ford heads, as Barrows had pointed out, look in here and look at the flow pattern. This comes in and goes at a 90. That's not exactly what you want on on these heads. You kind of want it to flow pretty even. So yeah, that's kind of no bueno in there. And as you can see with my finger, it's actually hitting all that up in there. So the actual flow on these from the factory isn't that good. Now, if you look at the aluminum head on this side, let me get this moved over here a little bit more. It's not as much at a 90. It's not an exact 90, but it's more open flow from where the exhaust seat is in here. So that's a lot better. Now, I can tell you this much just by looking at these heads. Here's kind of a better picture. You can see on this side here, the port is much, much bigger within here to actual flow compared to the cast iron side. Now, I am going to come in here a little bit and clean this area up, and I'm actually going to port match these like I did with the intake to the gasket. Just open these up just slightly. I'm not going to lower that floor all the way down like on there. I'm just going to smooth it out just a little bit. So as you can see, on the exhaust side of these forge heads, from the factory casting to the aluminum one, there is quite a bit of difference, even though they consider this as cast. So now you can kind of see when I purchased these heads, did my initial review, talked to Jimmy of what we really need to do to make these heads flow. We're not making them, you know, a complete drag race head. It's more of a straight strip head. But let's get a kind of a look here on the combustion chamber side. Quite a bit of difference on these. Like I said, this is the 72cc chamber factory Ford head. This is the 95cc aluminum head. And like I said before, that's just because of the compression ratio I'm going with. Yeah, so that's kind of a quick head comparison. Real quick on this, if you could take a look inside the exhaust port, it's kind of a better view. You can see the obstruction within here. And like I said, Bear Rose had done a really good job of pointing that out. I'm going to try to get in there, and yeah, there's kind of a good view. So you can see with that head on how actually there's a lot of restriction in there. That's not something you really want at all. Now you look at the other head here. I can just get my camera kind of at an angle I like it. So on this exhaust side here, take a look. It's much better. It's a lot more open. That big hump isn't in there compared to the other one, where you see right in that spot compared to the Ford head. You see all that obstruction. Yeah, these heads are nasty and gross, but they're going to serve its purpose for a different project in the near future. So yeah, that is kind of a quick overview of these Ford heads. The kind of budget, low buck aluminum versus the stock factory cast iron. Yeah, not too bad for what they serve the purpose of, but you know what? I'm kind of glad that I did go with the budget-minded heads. I'm still kind of trying to do this project on a budget, but there is quite a bit of difference when it comes to the intake ports and the exhaust ports on these. These actually have a lot better flow right out of the box than the factory iron heads. We're going through these, like I said, just cleaning them up. Mild port, there's going to be a mild polish. But I just kind of wanted to show you from a perspective of these quote-unquote as cast versus the stock ones. So maybe you learned something, maybe you didn't. This is kind of a play off of Bear Rose's video. When I watched that, I was like, you know what? I got to kind of show this for him in comparison to it. So, yeah. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a good one.